10%, that's the number every finance guru, every textbook, and every retirement calculator throws at you. They all tell you that the S&P 500 returns about 10% a year on average. But here's almost something nobody tells you. In the last 98 years, going all the way back to 1928, the S&P 500 has only delivered a return of between 8 to 10% in 3 of those years. 3 out of 98. And even if you become more forgiving and widen the band to plus minus 2%, so anything between 8 to 12, the number only climbs to 4 out of 98. Essentially, the average year almost never actually happens. And the funny thing is, it isn't even close. So roughly 96% of the time, the market is doing something other than this famous average 10% suggests. So if you have been planning a portfolio or even your retirement around this nice clean 10% figure, we need to talk. Because that number is technically correct, but at the same time, it misses the entire point of what a real investor needs to be comfortable with. So I went ahead and pulled the actual numbers from the dataset compiled by Professor Damodaran, and he's currently teaching at the NYU, covering 98 years of the S&P 500 total returns, including dividend reinvested. And the long-run compounded annual returns come out to almost exactly 10.02%. So on the surface, this famous 10% number absolutely checks out. But the distribution of those returns are exactly where it gets interesting. So as we've shared at the start, the returns on a yearly basis that lands close enough to the average was about 4 out of the 98 years. Then how about the rest? Well, in about 37% of those years, more than 1 in 3, the S&P 500 returned more than 20%, ripping way above the average. And in about 12% of those years, it lost more than 10%. So if to add those up, nearly half of all the years are either booming or crashing. And that boring middle that we talked about, where the market just behaves by itself and delivers something reasonable, basically does not exist. And now, the more interesting question is, why does this happen? And there are actually 3 reasons that explains almost all of this. So the first reason is that the markets don't actually move on fundamentals, at least not in the short term. So they move on expectations. And if you think about it, it is pretty intuitive. So expectations are being formed by market participants, and they're all fellow human beings like you and I that are deeply emotional, and they tend to swing sentiments of the markets to either extremes. And truth be told, if you look at the long-run growth of the company earnings across long periods of time, they grow pretty steadily over time, somewhere between 4 to 6% a year on average on nominal terms. But the price that investors are willing to pay for those specific earnings actually swing pretty wildly between greed and fear. So in a good year, earnings might potentially grow 15%, but the market returns 30% because everyone suddenly decides that the future looks bright and they're willing to pay a much higher multiple. And conversely, in a bad year, a subdued 10% earnings growth happens, which could still be better than average, but the market loses 20% because everyone is panicking and the multiples get crushed. So Ben Graham said it best when he wrote that in the short term, the market is a voting machine, and in the long run, it's a weighing machine. Most years, what we're looking at is actually the voting, but not the weighing. And the second reason is that recoveries don't actually happen gradually. They happen in violent snaps. So after every major crash in this data set, the market doesn't politely recover at 8% a year over the next decade. It tends to roar back hard. And in 1993, the year after the worst of the Great Depression, they returned almost 50%. And 1954 returned 52%. Still the best year on record. And in 2003, coming out of the dot-com crash, they returned 28%. And 2009, after the global financial crisis, was 26%. So I think case in point here, the recoveries are themselves extreme events. And the third reason is that volatility isn't a bug in the system. It's the entire reason you get paid to be in the market in the first place. So think about it this way. Why do stocks pay you significantly more than government bonds over the long run? Because stocks are inherently risky and they swing, both to the up and downside. So if returns were smooth and predictable at 10% per year, stocks would actually be priced like bonds, and you would not earn that risk premium per se. So you're not earning 10% despite the volatility. You're earning 10% because of the volatility. And now, here's what I think many investors tend to forget. The market doesn't just have volatile years, they sometimes can have volatile decades. And these regimes are long enough to define your entire investing career. So let me show you what I mean. So if you were to break down the S&P 500 by decade, the 1930s actually lost money, a negative compounded return over 10 full years. The 1950s then compounded at roughly 19.5% per year, and that's double of the average rate. The 1970s gave you a mediocre 10%, and the 1990s reaped at 18%. The 2000s lost money again, and the 2010s came back at 13%. And right now, in this current decade, we are sitting at roughly 15% per year. So when we are talking about an average long-run return of 10%, the markets tend to alternate between both euphoria and brutal decades too, if you stretch the timeline out long enough. And here's where it gets kind of personal. Most investors don't actually invest in the quote-unquote market. They invest in a specific 20 to 30 year slice of the market that happens to coincide with their working life. So the slice you get is basically a roll of the dice based on when you were born. To give you an example, a boomer who started saving and investing in 1982 caught one of the greatest 18-year run in history right at the start of their career. And a Gen X investor who started in 1999 caught the dot-com bust and the global financial crisis back to back during their highest earnings capacity years. And that's why a lot of them still kind of stay skeptical of equities today. And a millennial who started in 2010 has only ever known a market that goes up. So none of them are wrong about what they personally experienced, but all of them are wrong about what the market would become, because the market they remember is just one slice of what they have lived through. And here's the uncomfortable historical pattern that I think it's worth sitting with. So look at the lost decades again, the 1930s and the 2000s. So both of them came immediately after periods of extreme euphoria and relatively high valuations. So the roaring 1920s ran hot before the 1930s gave it all back. And the late 1990s ran hot before the 2000s gave it all back. So we are currently 16 years into a strong regime. That doesn't mean that the next decade is automatically a lost decade with zero returns. But history does have a fairly specific pattern of suggesting that euphoria decades and digestion decades tend to alternate. And the hardest part about these regimes is that they're almost completely unrecognizable while you're inside them. So the regime only becomes obvious in hindsight, of course, which is exactly why trying to time and position yourself for the next decade based on what feels right today is one of the most expensive mistakes you possibly can make. So at this point, you might be wondering, okay, the average always never happens. The regimes are unpredictable. The timing is essentially impossible. So what do I eventually do with my money? The natural human instinct, especially when markets are at moments of high, is to wait, to sit in cash, to be prudent, to say that I'll get in when things look safer. But here's the thing. The entire reason the cyclicality exists is precisely because people behave that way. And the irony is that this fear of investing at the top is exactly what causes people to miss the momentum that define the strongest decades. So the answer to all this volatility, all of this regime uncertainty, all of this knowing what comes next, is not to be smarter about when to enter or exit. The answer is to drag out your time horizon as long as humanly possible, so that you own enough decades that the regime you happen to start in basically doesn't matter anymore. So let me show you what I mean with actual numbers. So if you invest in the S&P 500 for just 1 year and you take any of these random years, history actually says that you have about a 26% chance of losing money. And that's roughly 1 in 4. And that's a coin flip with pretty bad odds. So if you stretch that out to a 5-year holding period, the chances of losing money drops to about 12%. Stretch it out to 10 years and it drops to about 6%. And stretch it out to 15 years and it drops to just over 1%. Only one rolling 15-year period in 84 years have ever produced a negative return. And that one was barely negative, basically flat. And here's the number that should change how you think about investing forever. So in 79 rolling 20-year periods, going back to 1928, the S&P 500 has never produced a negative return. Let me repeat, never produced a negative return. Not during the Great Depression, not through the World War II, not through the stagflation of the 1970s, not across the dot-com crash and the global financial crisis back to back, and the worst 20-year stretch in nearly a century still gave you about 2.4% returns a year. And the best 20-year stretch gave you almost 18%. But the floor was never below zero. So this is the actual answer to the regime problem that we've been talking about. You don't need to predict which decade you're currently in. You don't need to know whether the 2020s will be running hot or whether you're heading into a digestion period. You just need to be invested for long enough that you own a piece of multiple regimes. And the market doesn't reward you for being clever, but instead being able to outlast them. So the single most important investing decision you will ever make is not what to buy or when to buy it. It is how early you start and how long you can commit to staying in. So every additional year you can add to your investing horizon is mathematically much more valuable. And this is why a 19-year-old who invests modestly almost always ends up wealthier than the 50-year-old who invests aggressively, unless they already have multi-millions to start. And it's why putting off investing, because the market feels expensive right now, is one of the most expensive decisions a young investor can make. And with that, this is CK from Piranha Profit signing off. Till next time, keep winning.